Oz Yosher Moshe of Bnei Yisrael as Hashira Hazos. The great moment of Moshe and Klal Yisrael singing the praise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the great Shira. Not only had they experienced a nes, but they'd had the special clarity of mind and clarity of neshama to be able to see Vayah Yisrael as a Yod HaGeulah, She'os Hashem b'Mitzrayim. They were able to see the Yad Hashem in the clearest way possible. Zeh Eli v'Anveyu, to, so to speak, point at HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, yes, this is the Rebbeinu Shalom that we believe in. This was a supreme moment of Emunah, Vayaminu b'Hashem of Moshe Avdo, and that is captured here in this magnificent Shira. I'd like to have a closer look just for a moment at the opening word of the Shira. Oz Yosher Moshe B'nai Yisrael. So what does the word Oz mean? Rashi's bothered by it, and the Mefarshim, the Ramban. Why use the word Oz? The normal way of expressing it would have been Vayoshar Moshe B'nai Yisrael as Hashira Hazos. That's the song they sang. Why Oz Yosher Moshe? So on a simple level, Oz simply means it was that moment. There was a moment, a magic moment, so to speak, where everything came together. Both the climax, the finale of the whole of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the certainty that they would never have to fear Egypt again, the knowledge that they were safe, and on top of it all, that they had seen the Yad Hashem with total clarity, Ros or Shifcha Alayom, that even the most simple person there had seen the Yad Hashem. But I'd like to give a bit of a more deeper, interesting explanation to the word Oz, and I think it's got a hidden meaning, which I find particularly fascinating. And the background to this is as follows. That earlier on, chapter Yud Daled Posuk Hey, it says, Vayugad lemelech Mitzrayim ki borach ha'om, and Rashi there gives us a whole luach zmanim, a whole sequence of events, day after day, what happened on day 1 of Pesach, day 3, day 5, day 6, day 7, and Rashi there says that the Shira, the Kriyas Yamsuf, took place on the 7th day of Pesach, says Rashi. Shvi'i shel Pesach. And that's why, says Rashi, he had the minhag, and we also have the minhag, that on Shvi'i shel Pesach, on the last day of Pesach, we lay in Shul Beshalach. We lay in the parsha of the Shiras Hayom, this particular part of Sefer Shemos is read because that's when it happened, on Shvi'i shel Pesach. But there's a problem here, and it's a question that is raised by several Mefarshim. The Sifsei Chachamim raises it, the Maharal in Gur Aryeh raises it, the Daz Zakenim Balei HaTosfos raised the question that if you look at the end of Parshas Shlach Lecha, there you find the Parsha of Tzitzis. And in the very, very end of the Parsha of Tzitzis, Rashi gives us some symbolic understanding of all the different threads and knots which go into the making of a tzitzis. And one of the things Rashi there says is that there are 8 threads on each of the 4 corners. Why are there 8 threads? Because of the supreme moment of Emunah was Kriyas Yamsuf, and Kriyas Yamsuf happened on the 8th day of Pesach. What does that mean, the 8th day of Pesach? Right? First of all, in the Torah, there are only 7 days of Pesach. What does he mean, the 8th day, right, after Yetzias Mitzrayim? What does that mean? And surely Rashi, when he wrote his commentary on Shlach Lecha, had not forgotten what he'd written in Parshas Beshalach, that it was on the 7th day. So what was it, on the 7th day or on the 8th day? So the answer that's given is very fascinating. And that is, if you look at the story of Pesach Mitzrayim, what happened there. So on the 15th of Nisan in the evening was Leil Seder. They ate the Korban Pesach. They left Mitzrayim. That was the moment may Avdus Lecherus. But was it? Because really, something very fascinating we find about Pesach, which we don't find with any other Yontef, that actually several parts of the halachas of the Yontef begin halfway through Erev Pesach. For example, the Isur of Chometz, as we all know, begins from midday on Erev Pesach. Doesn't begin in the evening. So Erev Pesach already is the beginning of Yontef. And why is that? So the Mefarshim there say something very fascinating. That actually, in a certain sense, the first day of Pesach isn't the 15th of Nisan. The first day of Pesach is the 14th of Nisan. And indeed, the Pasuk says this explicitly. The Pasuk says, Ba'abasa yom lechodesh Pesach l'Hashem, what does it mean, the Pasuk, when it says that? It means on the 14th of Nisan, Pesach Hashem. It doesn't mean the Yontif. The Torah never calls the Yontif Pesach. We call it Pesach. The Torah calls the Yontif Chag HaMatzos. So what does it mean on the 14th of Nisan was Pesach Lashem? It means that's the moment they shechted the Korban Pesach and they put the blood on the doorpost. Says the Maharal very beautifully. That was the beginning of the Geulah on a spiritual level. They were still geographically and politically in Mitzrayim and under the thumb of the Egyptians, but spiritually, by shechting the Korban Pesach, they had disconnected from the Avodah Zarah and the materialism and the paganism, the culture of Egypt. There was an act of defiance, an act of rejection, and that was a spiritual moment where they had become mentally and spiritually free of the Egyptians. That was the moment of the beginning of the Geulah. So in a sense, Erev Pesach is day one. Now it's true that the 15th of Nisan was the real Geulah. That was the moment they went me'avdus l'cheiros, the chipazon. So says the Maharal very interestingly, we divide up the halachas of Pesach into two different groups. The Isur Chometz begins on Erev Pesach, because the Isur Chometz connects to the idea that Klal Yisrael were able to negate and do away with all the negative aspects of Mitzrayim and to assert their own identity and to really reject totally the paganism of Egypt. And that's the Isur Chometz, and that happens on Erev Pesach. The eating of the matzah only starts on Pesach itself, because that's the B'chipozon Yotzu Mitzrayim. Pesach, matzah zu al shumma, al shum shenigalu Mitzrayim, with great speed. The great speed, the chipazon, was the physical leaving of Egypt, me'avdus l'cheiros. But the mental and spiritual turning point was an Erev Pesach. And therefore, says the Maharal, and the Sifsei Chachamim, and the Baalei HaTosfos, that actually Kriyas Yam Tov took place on a day that was also day 7, counting from Leil Seder, but it was also day 8, starting from the real spiritual beginning of the Geulah, right? And therefore, it had these, if you like, two different dimensions to it, and that's what Rashi means. In one place, Rashi calls it day 7, counting from Leil Seder, and the other place, he calls it day 8, counting from the spiritual moment of the Korban Pesach. And that, I think, is a very fascinating insight into all the process, that it comes at two different levels. And indeed, in our Seder night, we mention these two different levels when we say, V'nodelecho shir chodosh al geulosenu v'al pedus nafshenu. These are two different things. The geulosenu is me'avdus l'cheiros on Leil Seder, but pedut nafshenu is the moment of emunah on Erev Pesach, which enabled them to defy the Egyptian culture and take a stand against that whole pagan way of life. And that was really the beginning of Yetzias Mitzrayim, spiritually speaking. What does that got to do with our Shira? Because I think there could be a very interesting remez here. That the Torah starts off, Oz Yosher Moshe, that was the moment. The moment was Oz, and the word Oz is written Aleph Zayin. Aleph Zayin means 1 and 7. And the Aleph always represents the Emunah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Aleph is the letter which isn't vocalized by itself. It's a silent letter, but relates to oneness and the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And even in the way the Aleph is written in the Sefer Torah, there are 2 Yuds and a Vav, which is the gematria of 26 of the Yud Kei Vav Kei within the Aleph itself. So the Aleph was the Emunah of Erev Yontif. The Aleph is the Emunah of Erev Yontif. That's before even the events start taking place. That's the preparatory state of mind without which the Yetzias Mitzrayim couldn't take place. And that took place on Yudalad, on the 14th of Nisan. And that's the Oz Yosher Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu understood that what had started spiritually on Erev Yontif and physically on the day of Pesach itself, that had now reached its climax, and that was Oz Yosher Moshe. And that was a very special understanding of the word Oz, that it contains this remarkable symbolism of that particular moment, of peak moment of Emunah. Just to add to this very briefly, there's a phrase that is used in the Torah twice about Bnei Israel going through the Yam Suf. The phrase says, "V'hamayim lahem chomo miyiminam u'mismolom," that the waters solidified into walls on the right and on the left, and they went on dry land through the middle. That's how the Torah describes it in chapter 14. Except this phrase appears twice. Once in Pasuk 22, once in Pasuk 29. V'hamayim lohem choba. The water became a wall, miyiminam u'mismolom, on the right and on the left. The Medrash, incidentally, says, what is the right and the left doing here? It's a remez to the Torah, to the Zechus of Torah, which they didn't have yet. But they were going to receive the Torah, and the Torah itself, learning of the Torah itself, is miyimino eish dos lomo. The Pasuk in Zos HaBracha speaks about HaKadosh Baruch Hu bringing the Torah to Klal Yisrael miyamino with his right hand, and the left hand is the left hand of the Tefillin, say Chazal. So it was between the Talmud Torah and the Tefillin, they carried that Zechus carried them through the Yam Suf. But there's a very interesting, subtle distinction between the way it's written in Pasuk 22 and the way it's written in Pasuk 29. Because in Ma'im Lahem Chomo is spelled first Ches Vov Mem Hey. But in Pasuk 29 it's written Chet Mem Hey without the Vov. What's the significance of this? Says the Medrash that we know what Ches Mem Hey means. It's true we read it, we vocalize it as Chomo, as a wall, but actually it spells something else. It spells the word Chemo. Chemo means anger. Find in Megillas Esther, right? That when Haman saw that Mordechai wasn't bowing down to him, Vayimolei Haman Chemo, he was filled with anger. So it's interesting, say Chazal, that in the Kriyas Yam Suf, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was also protecting Klal Yisrael with a protective Choma, but he was also angry with them because they hadn't really reached the point that he wanted them to reach. What does that mean? Lots of different Perushim to this, but actually there is something fascinating here, which is connected to one of the stories that everybody knows about Kriyas Yam Suf, but is not written anywhere in the Pasuk. And that is the story of Nachshon ben Aminodov, the Nasi of Shevet Yehuda. According to Chazal, he jumps into the Yam Suf before it split, and he went into it up to his neck. And the tribe of Yehuda followed him, right? And then it split. Where is that written in the Torah? Rashi brings it down actually in Hallel. But Seis Yisrael Mitzrayim, Beshalach Meyam Loyez, Hoisa Yehuda Lekodsha. That Yehuda was Makadesh Shem Shamayim and led the way. And that's Nachshon ben Aminadab, says Rashi, who jumped in all the way before it split. Where is that written in the Pasuk? So here's a very interesting thing. In Pasuk 22, where Chomo is spelt with a Vav, there it says that Klal Yisrael went by Abosha, they went Besoch Hayom by Abosha. They went into the sea, and then it became dry land. In Pasuk 29, it says, Bnei Yisrael holchu bayabosha b'soch hayom. They went into the dry land in the middle of the sea. What's the difference? That Nachshon ben Aminadab jumps in to a raging sea to do something which is impossible, based simply on his emunah and his determination and his understanding of the destiny of Klal Yisrael. He understood that he had to do something which didn't make any sense at all. So he went Besoch Hayom by Abosha, and that was Choma. That was then HaKadosh Baruch Hu protected them. But the rest of Klal Yisrael went only once the waters had split. They went by Abosha, Besoch Hayom. That was Chema. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was angry with them because they hadn't really reached the required level of emunah. And this is very interesting to the whole story of Kriyas Yam Suf and the story of Klal Yisrael, that in every generation there are leaders and there are followers. There are people who know what they're doing, who are motivated by emunah and by understanding and by insight into the Yad Hashem and the destiny of Klal Yisrael, and they're willing to do things which are impossible because they have that emunah. That's the aleph of the Oz Yosher Moshe. The rest of Klal Yisrael are followers. They don't really know what they're doing or why they're doing it, but they have a sense of identity. We're part of Klal Yisrael, we're going to follow. Both groups are doing great things. But the leaders, they are the Nachshon ben Aminadab. And interestingly, in the middle of Eretz Yisrael, there is a kibbutz called Kibbutz Nachshonim. And they called it Nachshonim because the pioneers, the Chalutzim, who came in 1948 to fight the battle of independence that was an impossible battle. On paper and logically, it made no sense at all. They were doing the act of Nachshon ben Aminodov, diving into the sea, not having the faintest idea how the logistics could possibly work out for them, how they could possibly win this battle. So when they built a kibbutz there, they said, you know who we are? We are the spiritual heirs of Nachshon ben Aminodov. We're going to call our kibbutz Nachshonim. Sadly, they weren't people who were shown with Torah mitzvahs, but they had a tremendously powerful feel for the power of Klal Yisrael, for the future of Klal Yisrael, for the beauty of Eretz Yisrael. And every generation has its own Nachshon ben Aminodovs who go in Besoch Hayam, and then it comes Yabasha. And that was really the great strength of Klal Yisrael. That was the Aleph of the Oz. That was the Emunah, which was the prerequisite for Kriyas Yamsuf, which led the way for Klal Yisrael to go on their way towards Har Sinai and eventually towards Eretz Yisrael. And this is really the message of this parsha, that there are always leaders and followers, and Yehirotzen, Sheniya L'Roish, V'lo L'Zonov, V'chein Yehirotzen.